do. Hey everyone, Matt from Soundrolling.com, and I'm here with Ben Osmo, sound mixer, recorder. So let's do the ceremonial dong to set things off. So hey Ben, how's it going?
Very well, thank you.
Fantastic.
Had a good day today. I've had a surf.
Oh,
it's nice down here. When I say down.
True Australian style. I like it. I like it.
Yeah, live by the beach. It's really nice.
So firstly, I suppose we should start with where it all began. How did you get started?
Straight after school, got a job in an advertising agency, and because I was pretty good in art at high school, and I thought if I'd get a job in an advertising agency, I'd become a commercial artist, and they're artists that get paid. But I did. Yeah. It was that was my naive thought about it. But obviously started at the bottom in the dispatch department, and they put us through college at the same time, and I did layout and design courses. And however, there was an opportunity to get out of dispatch within the company, and I got a position as an assistant in the projection room. And they had a little 16mm projector, and we used to screen films or commercials or little takes for, casting, that kind of thing. And so I learned how to do that, and then they developed a really small video studio, which had audio as well. And we used to make up little dummy commercials from the artists used to have little cards that we had on. This is really antique. They had little cards on pedestals and 2 cameras, and we'd flick the cards. So we'd cut from one camera to another camera, and we'd roll the sound. We'd made up a little, narration and music, and I did jingles and all that kind of stuff. And we'd cut from one camera to the other camera, and once we were on camera 2, we'd flick the other cards. We'd cut back to the card number 3, and we made a little dummy commercial so as they could see how it was going before it gets really shot. So little storyboards basically. And so I was there for a while and enjoyed it, but I what they call a gap year these days. Yeah. I decided to go surfing. So I moved. I quit that job and went surfing for a year up the north coast of New South Wales, which was a really lovely experience. And then when I got back to Sydney, I got a job in a production house. Because I had the experience of threading projectors and working with that kind of environment, I got a job in the back room of a mixing theatre. And that was a really great experience for me, because I was threading projectors and dubbers, and we had loops, and we're talking about 16mm, 35, 17.5mm mags. And we had only half a dozen dubbers, I think, and a couple of loops. We had discs that would spin in like DJs, and maybe a 1/4 inch at the same time. And no, it was a lot of fun. It was like very basic filmmaking, but the beauty of it was that within the small grounds of the production house, there were 2 film editors, there was a film lab, and there was a DP that basically worked out of there, and so there was a small little stage. But it was a really great experience, because you could see the whole gamut of filmmaking under one roof. And then I joined the ABC, which is the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and started off as an assistant there, and very soon, because I had 2 or 3 years experience beforehand, I got the job in as a junior sound recordist who went out with the used cameras and that kind of thing, and then that developed into little departments that they had within the ABC, and I was there for 10 years, so I had the gamut of documentary productions, little comedy things, musicals and dramas, and then I got into the mini features that they made within the ABC, sort of like a small BBC. And we had a few DPs from the UK that had emigrated and brought experience from there, which was good. Then I got headhunted to teach at the film school, and mind you, I've got no credentials, but after 10 years, I guess with the experience counted then, and I spent nearly 6 months there, just taking the job from a previous recordist, actually boom swinger, Noel Quinn, an Irish gentleman who went back to Ireland and continues his career there. You probably see a lot of his credits. He was a really excellent boom operator. But he'd worked at the film school and had a job for 5 or 6 months. It was one of the first food documentaries. So it was food all around the world, and we spent 6 months doing that. So I took over from that, which was a great experience because it gave me the environment that I never had at university. And all of a sudden, even though I was a lecturer there, I could still be able to grab a lot of information from there. And I was excited about that kind of young environment that it initiated. I really loved it. So through the years, I've always gone back to various film schools and mentored, or did the odd guest lecturing, or just went on location with the young crews and gave them a few tips. But after that, I started going freelance. So I bought a couple of secondhand mics and an Nagra, and all secondhand gear to start with. And a lot of people don't tend to do that these days, I guess because technology changes a lot, but microphones don't. Microphones can, if you maintain a good microphone, it can last you a long time. I digress. But anyway, I started working on Current Affairs 60 Minutes, and it was called Beyond 2000. It was a science program run by Australian producers and journalists, and they went around the world looking at new technologies, and that was really interesting.
Wow.
Then I got my first feature film whilst I was working at 60 Minutes. I was approached by a director that I had worked with in the past there and at the ABC, and he was making a feature, and I got the job there, and that was a good experience. But the second feature I got was with Gillian Armstrong, and that was groundbreaking for me because in the past I'd worked with gaffers and grips and DPs that always seemed to, not, I'm generalizing here, but it was a revelation for me to come on set, and one of the electrics guys said, "Oh, here Ben, here's your power." And I just got on set. I just put my trolley down where I thought it was a good spot, and it came there, and I thought, I'm in heaven here. And the lighting was just so beautiful that huge scrims and big single lights through scrims that made it beautiful for booming. And all of a sudden I I thought, if this is what feature films is like, you know, after working 10 years in television, it was a revelation. I really loved it. And they were, you know, I was very fortunate because Russell Boyd, who's got a couple of Academy Awards as a DP, was the DP there. And the grip is a legendary grip gentleman, actually from Devon originally, Ray Brown, and he's a legend amongst us. We all respect him highly because he's a real gentleman. He always came to work with a tie, even though it might have been a torn sleeve shirt. It always had a tie.
Amazing. Well, it sounds like it's really interesting just how you've kind of gone from post-production kind of straight into the wars of like network television and kind of being on the front line of news and then building towards drama.
To go back a little bit at the ABC, we had really good heads there, and it was a really great environment where, if as a young person you were a bit of a loss of what was going to happen for you the next day, you knew you were going to do a particular job. There were like something like 29 crews there, and we'd all have a meeting place where we picked up our equipment, etc. And there were the older gentlemen, you know, they could have been DPs or sound recordists, and there was no us and them. It was everybody was in it together, and so information was passed on without any you know, second thoughts, you know, and it was really enjoyable environment in that way. But yeah, so the way that they trained the people in those days was you'd spend at least 6 months in the transfer suite, where you would be not only transferring, which is a job to do, but and we're talking about 1/4 inch to 16 mil or whatever. Yeah. But you'd be listening. You were in a little booth, and all you did was listen to the sound takes, and that would give you you would hear the difference between the recordings of different locations, different people, and with the experience that I had when I was in the production house beforehand, because I was the assistant, I'd be listening to the mix, and there were different mixes that were coming in, and that it gave you the ear of what was happening. And ultimately, for 6 months or maybe a year, I think I was at that place, my boss, my mixer, ended up going freelance, and things were pretty slow, and I was about 21 or 22 or something, and my boss, the producer there, said, Ben, you know, things are going slow, but, you know, I'm happy for you to step up. And so I started mixing only with about 3 years experience, you know, in it. But what I did in those days was, even though I would think that I would work out that how long would it take for the other experienced mixer to do that job? It might take him an hour to do it, but it might take me 3 hours. I would only charge the clients an hour. And that's how I got around it, you know. Right. And it was, and also I'd stay back and do extra work. And I went to college there for a year to do film production. But yeah, that's sort of, I think, how, and including the transfer suite, how I got, I started getting the ear for what was happening. Plus, for a year and a half or so, in different times, I was mixing in one of the suites at the ABC, more documentary type stuff.
Right. And did you understand back then kind of the difference between, was there much difference between like the documentary, like what you were listening to mixing for documentaries than for kind of news?
Oh, definitely. Because I think coming from the production house and coming from what I was doing, going straight into news after a few months, I started recording all the sound effects and atmospheres. I remember particularly one time it was a fire that we were attending, and it's just great sound. I'd go off and record minutes and minutes of sound, of atmospheres. But I got a real bollocking from the editor, and he said, look, we haven't got time to go through all this stuff. You know, all I want is the sync sound with the camera and maybe one overlay. You know? So I had to rationalize and say, okay, what am I doing today? I'm doing news, or am I doing a documentary, or am I doing drama? You know, so you had to work out what the final product was going to be. But yeah, that was a good lesson. And I got a lot of lessons there too, like, for example, footsteps. You know, the early days I'd be recording the dialogue and the footsteps at the same time, and this is for drama. And, you know, the editor would get me aside at one stage, and it was like being at university, I guess, or at film school, you know, and you learned as you went in those days. But yeah, so after that and a couple of features, that's when I decided that's what I wanted to do, and stay on working on feature films.
And so what captured you about the production as opposed to, say, doing the post mix on feature films?
Well, when I was in the early days, when I was listening to the really good mixers that were doing, you know, in those days, Peter Weir films, and it was just something about the dialogue that it sounded different to anything else that I'd heard. And you could hear the room, but you could, you know, it still had the warmth and the timbre of the voices, and it carried my imagination to, you know, if it was a period film, it just made you feel like you were there. And it wasn't just the settings; it was the sound that came from there. And that was, you know, because there were good recordists, and the processing of the dialogue alongside with the sound effects and the music, it you know, it took me to another world, and I guess I loved it, you know, and also told a story.
Yeah.
And but I still love, you know, I don't do too many documentaries anymore. I think the last one was the history of surfing in Australia, when I got invited to do that.
Amazing.
A few years back, and I thought, yeah, I think I'll do that. That would be fun. Yeah, but yeah, so basically these days it's feature films, or the last couple of years I've worked on a couple of mini-series, which I hadn't done for many years. And there's a bit more finance gone into that these days, and so therefore it's not as fast. I mean, it is fast still. You still have to, again, work out what area you're going to be working for and how much time you have. But you can use all your feature film skills within the mini-series, but it's a much smaller crew, which sort of brings me back quite a few years, you know, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah, as long as you've got a couple of good boomies with you, you can do anything. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting how the lines are kind of blurring between kind of TV and film in a way. It's not always good when it's kind of film taking from TV in terms of schedules, but it's nice to see that production value generally increasing.
Yeah. But which it surprised me. The last thing I did was last year. It took 5 months, and I think it was an 8-part or 6. I think it was 8-part. But anyway, the producers said to me, "Look, we really want to try and get a feature film soundtrack on this thing, because it's coming out. It's on Foxtel here. I don't know. It's a cable thing, but generally a 6 or 8-part series would take about, I guess, 7 or 8 weeks to shoot, something like that. Well, this took 18 weeks. But wow. We had really tough locations in southern Tasmania, which is pretty wild kind of country. And it was beautiful to do. It was a real adventure for everybody. We were based in Hobart, which is a beautiful city. But yeah, so okay, the money structure was sort of the same, but the time frame was double, or almost double. So everybody took care, but it did take quite a while to get to location. So they took that into consideration. That's part of why the schedule was longer. But it's, you know, once we were there, you know, we did a few extra takes and, you know, a few extra angles and, you know, put a bit of thought into it. And it was beautifully shot, very minimalist style with the cinematographer, but it was great for us too. And we got some great atmospheres in the forests there at night time with the wind whistling through the tops of the pine trees, and you're down below and you can hear the resonance up there and the odd owl coming. You know, it was pretty amazing.
Amazing. Yeah, a dream.
Yeah, yeah. It was. It's a good show. It's called The Kettering Incident. That's going to be coming out. It's kind of, I don't know. It's kind of Broadchurch meets Twin Peaks.
Oh, wow.
Have you ever seen Twin Peaks?
Yeah.
That's pretty out there.
Right. Amazing.
Yeah, so it's a murder mystery, but a bit weird.
Yeah, more mystery than murder.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And you've also done, it's really interesting to see that you did Babe as well.
Yeah.
Both the Babes. What was that like in terms of having, obviously, the animals being voiceover, but then having live interactions as well?
Animal. They were
real animals.
Yeah, but they talk.
They actually talk.
No, that was good. That was a great experience because the first one. How did we do the first one?
95.
Yeah, 94. I think we shot it. Yeah, but you know, Pro Tools was fairly young then. So, but that was the beauty of being able to. It was a very close relationship with post production. So, Julius Chan, who was the sound supervisor on it, would lay up Pro Tools sessions. I didn't have Pro Tools in those days. I'm trying to think. Maybe he transferred it to DAT. But I know the second one we had, it became a little bit more sophisticated. But so the first one, Roger Savage, who's a sound mixer and owns Sound Firm, which is in Sydney and Melbourne and in China now. I think he's got a post-production house. He had a sound software that he modified for video split. And that was like in 1994, we had video split that could play back at the frame rate that was shot at.
Right.
So that's going back a while. I mean, you can do it these days, but, you know, that was the kind of breakthrough time. Yeah, so, but the second one was, so the first one we had a lot of live puppeteers. So I think I might have had, I don't know, 10, 12 lines with little headset mics with the puppeteers.
Yeah.
I had to feed them. They programmed the sound of each animal. So each puppeteer had each animatronic animal, and they programmed each sound and played it back live, if you like. And so the programming was for the mouth and the ears and maybe the eyes, and then the rest of the body movements they would do live. And so they pressed play, and so I was inputting all those and mixing them live into, you know, obviously I think a DAT recorder at the time, and also video split, and then video split would be able to play it back. So that was a bit, and also we had the the real animals, the CGI version of what we're doing. So in those days, we'd do a little bit of both, but a lot of animatronics, and relied a lot of animatronics. But as technology improved, the second one, it was a lot of CG, mostly CGI. We still had animatronics, but then I had a little laptop with Pro Tools, and I had sessions of the scenes that we were doing. So I was able to play it back, and mute certain characters out if needs be. And also George would say, oh, we're going to be filming the pig this time, little babe, because the real animal is quite frenetic in the movement. They always filmed it at like 32 frames, 36 frames. So I had a session made up, and Julius most of the time made them up for me, or his assistants made different sessions at different frame rates. So we did time expansion compression. So if it was going to be shot at 32 frames, I would play it back at the ratio compressed. So I'd play back really quickly, right? So it would then the video split would have that, and then they would play it back at the 32 frames, and that would then be at unity time. So you follow me? It played back at normal frame rate. So you'd see the animal a bit slower, but it would speak at 3 seconds, like it was the normal speech at 24 frames would be that. And so I started developing the skills of, and we made up a chart of, what to make it much faster for us. So what's if Unity is 24 frames, we'd work out what the expansion ratio, if it was under cranked or over cranked, we'd have it. And if we didn't have it, if you'd say, oh no, I want 40 frames, we'd quickly get it done, and then press play, that I really enjoyed too, because I would only hit play when I saw the character move its head in that particular direction.
Okay.
And I knew what he was trying, and it was really, it took us a long time to do that film, because of those parameters we had, but it ended up working okay, because you would be able to get an instinct of when the animal was going to move, and it would say, are you okay? That kind of thing. And you sort of like, in real time, it would really be moving quickly, so you'd really have to be on the ball. And then the animal trainers also had IFBs, and of course the camera operators. And that's when I started the voice of God thing with George Miller, because we had a more sophisticated comms setup. I think it was a Clearcom. And then we were able to have a lot of mix minuses for the puppeteers, because there was still some puppeteering going on. The animal trainers, all they needed to hear was George Miller speaking and what the program was, so they could hear what the animal was meant to be saying. Sometimes they just heard it a couple of times and then just tried the job. And then on replay, the video split would play back at normal speed in audio via the system that I talked about. So then you'd be able to tell right away whether it worked or not, So, and then if it didn't quite work, George might say, oh, well, can you advance or retard it a few frames so we could see if it actually will work? And that's what we'd tried to do as well.
Amazing.
So.
And have you always had such a close relationship with post-production in terms of like when you've been on set?
I have. Yeah, and I learned that early on, because some of my friends when I was at the ABC were film editors, and in those days there weren't they did everything. You know, they track, after they cut the film, they track laid, or, you know, if it was a bigger production, they might have got a sound editor in. But yeah, so there was a lot of talk between the two of us to see what else might happen that might make their job easier.
Yeah.
And I've never felt a gap between us. Particularly on shows like Babe and the Two Babes and the Happy Feet was the same sort of thing. That was even more complex because they had the motion capture.
Yeah.
Yeah. that was pretty wild too. It do you want me to talk about that, or go on to something else?
Yeah. I think is your mic on your headphones? I think it might just be catching on your shirt.
Oh, is it? Oh, right.
Possibly. I don't know if it's through there.
How's
Maybe.
that? Yeah. How's that? Is that better?
Oh yeah, that's better. It was just catching a little bit.
Okay, sorry. I can't hear myself, so that's the.
I know it's really disorientating. Isn't it? I can't hear myself either. But hopefully I'm all right.
No,
in terms of mocap as well, in terms of miking for that, you have a boom, I assume, as well, and then is it like a radio mic on the forehead, or how do you set
it was up on the cap, because they had caps. Again, because on the caps they had 2 or 3 of those dots to be able to focus on. Yeah. So I put little DPAs with little fluffies on the top of the caps, and we had about 10 of those, I think. But that was interesting as well, because when they went through the read-through of the film, they all sat around the table. I wasn't there, and they had a temp. What they called the story reel. They had a temp radio play, if you like, of the film, made up with the writers doing the voiceovers, or they'd employ local actors to come in and do some stuff. But if they added extra lines, they might have done there, or the editors said it just to have the sound, and cut it all in. So it's pretty rough. And so when they did the read-through, there were some things that George didn't quite like, but he was impressed how the dancers, who were also actors, read the lines. So he said, "Oh, look, when we do the mocap for the first run-through, which is the story reel, if I don't like a particular scene on the playback, I'll get you guys to do it." So and maybe ad lib extra stuff. That's how it came about. So I had the luxury of a Pro Tools playback person who hooked up time code with motion capture, and then he would feed me I think it was just 2 tracks of a mix down of the radio play, and then I would play it through IFBs in ears to the performers. They also had radio mics, so they would act out the thing and play back. Then George would say, "No, let's do this one live." And then I was ready, and so it was all radio mic'd. They did the job. I think I had 1 assistant at that time, and so that's how that came about. And that took a few months to do. Then I went away. They cut the thing together. Once they were happy, then they went to the States and recorded Robin Williams and all the other actors, and some Australian people, some UK, etc. Then came back and cut it all up and got ready to shoot it for real, and with a real dialogue. So then I came back after they'd done quite a lot of the action, and it was time to do the tap dancing. So I had I think 16 tracks of Pro Tools, and then DA'd that across to an HD Pro Tools setup, and I had, I think, 6 pairs of DPA mics in the boots, or on the boots, in the inside of the boots, and again they had in-ears, so they could, and a few of them had headset ones just to be able to talk back to George Miller, because it was a bit of a distance between where he was sitting and where they were dancing. So we went through a little bit of that, but then he got a specialist tap dancer from the United States, the guy that did the first Happy Feet, and at that stage he had a couple of mates that he brought along with him, because they were going to do a show at the Opera House. So when they went to see the show at the Opera House, the producers said, well, why don't you bring those guys across too? So there were three pairs of DPAs on their shoes. They had I think it was American oak floor laid to his specifications and the right sort of bounce to it. And basically he just let them rip, you know. They just did all sorts of different dances, some to click tracks, some to music that had been written beforehand. Some, we had the composer there who was listening to it and was going to, after that, compose music to some of the rhythms that the guys came up to. And so that was really fantastic to be part of, you know. I really enjoyed that. So we recorded them for 3 or 4 days, I think.
Wow.
And they went off. And then that's when the troupe came in to do the crowd tap dancing, if you like. And by that stage, all the snippets of the tap dancing were done or looped, or a little bit of music was put together. And then, like when you see, you know, like green screen crowds, you might have 100 crowds dotted here. You shoot that and then you move them across and do that. Well, we had a grid like that to make all the big crowds of the tap dancers. So each crowd might have been different penguins. And so it was just unbelievable seeing it live, seeing the people dancing in front of you, and there are penguins on the monitors. You know, it was, you could see it live. It wasn't totally rendered, but it was pretty well rendered by the time we finished it, because I think they were saying when they did the first one, it took maybe 2 or 3 days to actually get a 5-minute section back to see it,
right,
you know, reasonably rendered with the sound sunk up and that kind of stuff. And when I came along, the technology had changed so much, and we had Pro Tools that linked up with everything. It was a matter of seeing it live and then in 5 minutes seeing it reasonably rendered, you know.
Wow.
And we had a young video editor who was running Final Cut, and he would get a feed out of each session that we were doing. So then he would send that off to the editors so they can get an idea, because with motion capture, there's so much data that's involved, and it's all just numbers by the time it gets down the pipeline. So at least we had a good guide of what the thing should look and sound like, you know, when it got there. Yeah. And then, of course, it took ages for them to, and you know, I don't know.
Finally, 400
or 500 people on staff at one stage doing all the rendering and the lighting, and you know, in post for the animation part of it. It was just fantastic. There was one thing with the plankton. Did you ever see the film?
I
Yeah,
I don't think I've seen two. I think I might have
yeah.
seen one.
Okay, there's a plankton. There's two guys that are planktons, and they've, you know, like little long, many-legged animal, and it was just hilarious seeing all the dancers becoming one, because they were all, when they're what do they call it? When they're captured, they can be captured at a different type of animal. So,
Right.
you know, they'll stay like that, and the motion capture people will sort of assign different people and different motions. When they're static like that, they can work. They'll have the figures for, you know, say a king penguin, a emperor penguin, or something like that. But when it became this little mollusk thing, the plankton, there were like three, might have been 3 or 4 dancers sitting on apple boxes with just their arms and their legs going like this.
Wow.
You know, so, and they made it look like one character, and it was just awesome to see, because then they were tap dancing too, you know.
Oh my God.
So that was a great experience.
Yeah, it sounds
Yeah.
insane just having all that. Yeah, so you'd record, so like everything's going on at once. It's crazy. And then all that's just fed into the rendering of the animation, but are they using your sound of the tap dancing?
Yeah, the tap
Yeah.
dancing, yeah, yeah. And then they obviously, oh yeah, but when we did the crowds, we had, I think I said there were 6 pairs of DPAs, and then I had 2 boom operators on either, a boom operator on either side, and another boom operator with a Shep's as like an XY setup that I've got
Yeah.
in the
Wow.
middle. So I had the boom sounds as well, which was beautiful, and it resonated beautifully. But so then they were able to take samples of that stuff too, and get little ice pick sounds or hits on ice or something like that, to be able to marry and sample that with the woody sound, and take away because the American oak sounded, and it's got a like metal, they've got metal
Heels, caps. Yeah.
taps, right? Yeah. So it's quite a unique sound on that kind of timber. When the crowd came, we had to get rid of that other floor because it was a little bit too stiff for them, because they had to become elephants, you know, sea elephants, whatever they're called. You know, they had to stamp really hard, and it was hurting them. So they had a much springier kind of floor, which sounded different again. And yeah, so then they laid all that stuff up, but then on top of that, kicked off via MIDI or whatever, different sound effects that they'd manufactured to make it sound like it's on ice.
Wow.
So I really loved it.
Yeah, it
I didn't
sounds
do the first one because they thought, oh, Ben, you'd be really bored, you know. But it's not just about me capturing the perfect sound, you know. It's being part of the filmmaking process and helping out in however I could, you know. That's what I really enjoy, you know. Of course, I'd like to get good sound as well, but
yeah, but
yeah.
if we wanted to get good sound, we'd just be in a studio, and then it would just be isolated room, and it'd be perfect circumstances, and then it's quite simple to do. But that's part of the fun and the challenge. In terms of like communicating with post, just in terms of like sound reports or like naming files, like how deep did you go into just making sure all that stuff was kind of noted down in metadata?
On those shows, it was really, really important, and we had to. Wayne Pashley, who was the sound designer and supervisor, and his crew, they actually dictated what we called each scene and each file, and there was a certain protocol for those things. And if I did any wilds, I would do it like any normal, you know, sound sheet that I would make up. And we'd also, that was, I think, the first time I was able to do digital sound sheets. That was a bit of fun.
Nice.
Because there were so many technical people on board. I learned a lot of stuff. And there was a lady that helped us out, you know, she said, oh, because she had to do it for continuity as well. And there were certain things that, because there's so many characters, and there were just a lot of these drop columns that you could just assign, and you press on the column, and you would have 25 characters, and you just scroll down to the one you wanted, and there it was, you know. That was awesome.
Amazing.
We're catching up now with you know, sound devices and all that stuff now, but I mean, for that was what they were doing years ago.
Yeah. And
they had to, because they had to be really accurate, otherwise you'd lose track of what stuff was.
Yeah, it'd be be in the sea. That'd be crazy.
Yeah. And it was like many letters long and numbers long, each file. Right. That was, yeah. So they had it sorted in that regard.
And how does that contrast to something like Mad Max? Because keeping track of all of those, especially when you're on the road and things like that.
Yeah, well, I made up some paper sound sheets, books for that film, and we would just, again, for each setup, we had the slate name for the scene. It was done the American system for, you know, if it was scene 32, you'd go 32 take 1, and then through the next stop with Apple and, you know, Beta, right, etc. So that was pretty straightforward. And then I didn't have the luxury in that, because I was in the back of a little 4-wheel drive van, you know. I was lucky enough to write that down. But basically, I had 5 recorders. I had 4 788s with CL8s and a 744, and I would mix down to the 744 as just for dailies, basically, so the editor could have a quick thing to look at. And any sound effects I had, you know, started. Oh, and each recorder, number 1 recorder was A. So in the file, I would write A-32 take 1. Right. And then if it was recorded also on the B roll, it would be -32 take 1, etc., etc. So I was able to keep count of what recorder was, you know, what takes and what things were recorded on which, you know. So I was madly writing away. Had I had those Wi-Fi,
CL Wi-Fi, yeah.
You know, I would have had 4 of them rigged up. Now I've got 2 now that I use, and it's just so beautiful. You know, it's so quick to, even while you're rolling, you can change the name and stuff on it. It's fantastic. I really enjoy that. And you know, naming tracks, etc. Yeah, so I stumbled through naming the things, but I couldn't do it all the time because we were on the move all the time, and there were so many characters that we were doing. But yeah, again, you know, it's only, what is it, 2012? It was only 3 years ago, and the technologies come around that I could have done that really quickly, you know. Again, with Post, they were actually in Australia at the time. We were in Namibia, so there wasn't that much that we talked about, except that I was talking to a gentleman in Sweden called Max Luxman, and he was going to, at one stage, going to come out and record the vehicles, but that fell through. Then the sound supervisor was going to come out, and that fell through. And fortunately, I had one of my assistants was a documentary sound recordist, and he stepped up. He Oliver Manchin, and he's from the UK originally and lives in Durban, in South Africa. And at the end of the filming, we had about 6 weeks left, I think. We organised for Ollie to go, and he had an assistant with him, and then some safety people and mechanics and all that kind of stuff. Whenever they were able to get a vehicle, they went off and recorded as much as they could. But at the same time, I was recording vehicles because I had, 4 recorders, and apart from the cast that I was recording, and there were guide tracks, there's no two ways about it. The vehicles, some of them were like 130 dB, at I don't know, 10 meters or something. They were really loud. Not the hero vehicle, that was still just a loud truck, and then the windows were blown out. And then when we're doing SimTrav, we had the huge helicopter fans and dust blowing in.
Wow.
And then if they weren't any as strong as they needed, they had these other things that looked like funnels that had this really piercing high frequency that blow your eardrums, and they blew those up as well. So that was quite interesting. but basically, I was trying to get reasonable guide track dialogue for when we were traveling, and on some scenes, it was quite usable stuff as well. But at the same time, I figured I'd record the vehicles at the same time, just put them on another recorder, and we had the same time code. I jammed all the machines, jammed all the cameras. We had Greenwich Mean Time, because at one stage they were going to have GPSs on the cameras. So they had the time, they had GPS time code, and they had the location. And for 3D for post, that's and the visual effects, they wanted that kind of accuracy. I don't know if they followed through with that, but that's how we gave it. That's what we gave them. That was their request. So we had mics under the manifold. We had it near the exhaust, in the engine bay, and the transmission, just out like a 416 type thing out in the back of the tanker. Inside the mesh, they had like a meshy kind of thing that was as much as I could traveling, and plus other vehicles, of course. And so for other vehicles within the scene, we'd mic those. And because we had a special system that would be able to carry stuff that was transmitted from a distance, we were able to carry that through. And on top of that, we had some playback with Coma and the drummers in the Duffwagon. Have you seen that film?
Yeah.
So the guy with the guitar, right? So I had in-ears for him and a little mic, so Iota could communicate back with us, or if it was a stunty, it was young Ben who's doing it. And funnily enough, Ben, Iota, myself, and one of the stunt coordinators had a little makeshift band that would play on a Sunday afternoon. We're all musos. And you just had a good bit of relaxed Sunday afternoon gig. And the drummers, so the drummers had in-ears, and I had little DPAs on their belts. I think that's about the only spot that I could have near the drums to be able to get a reasonable guide of the drums. They weren't very well tuned, but they gave us a good indication of what was going on. But Iota actually had written, he was the guy that he'd written some temp music for it, so they could use it for playback. And he was doing it. He had a couple of guitars, and he bought a tom, floor tom. Don't think he had a snare, just a floor tom, and he had a little Pro Tools kit. And that's when it all went pear-shaped. It just died on him. And we had a couple of Skype calls with a friend of mine in Australia who was able to guide him through it. And I mean, I did what I could, but I couldn't find the fault. And it was the actual, I think it was the firmware there was a problem with.
Right.
Or he had a little M-box. I can't remember, but he basically got a new system happening, and that was great. And so he did the little sound thing with the drums, and double track, triple tracked them, and put the guitar lines on top, and gave us a couple of versions. And so I had the Pro Tools session, and I mixed it down to what I thought we needed. And so off we go on the back of the little four-wheel drive, and I'm playing the Pro Tools, and it's cutting out all the time. So, oh no, what's going on? So I thought I'll dump it across to iTunes, and no, it keeps cutting out. So fortunately, I had a little iPod, and I transferred it across to that, and I played it with the iPod. I had the iPod up in the air and press record and rolling,
Wow.
Okay, off we go. And because we were doing like 60, 80 Ks on a desert road, and it was quite bumpy, because we weren't the stretch where they were off the road to where they were.
You're going over mountains.
and they worked well, but the trouble was trying to get the IFBs loud enough for them to get over the sound of the vehicles and over the sound of the drums, and they had to hear the guitar when it starts and when they start and all that kind of stuff. So it was a challenge for everybody, but it was an adventure also.
Yeah, it's really interesting just picking up on how you would on like headphone monitoring, especially because you're in a van, two, you're miking incredibly like loud sound sources. How do you get a feeling for the correct monitoring, or are you just kind of I'm just interested to just hear more about how you were able to monitor everything.
Well, I was isolated from them, so I wasn't close to the vehicle. I could have been 300-400 meters, 500 meters sometimes more, but it was a little van, so it wasn't that loud, and I did crank my headphones up a little bit.
Well,
I must admit.
Yeah, no, really have to.
But so what I did was I submixed. I had either, like left-right outputs out of each of the 788s, but I also had auxiliary out. So on top of what I was doing, I was also feeding the IFBs to the director, George Miller, and then PJ, the first AD and co-producer, he was riding with the vehicles a lot of the time. He was always with where the cameras were.
Yeah.
And he wanted to hear George Miller, and whenever there was dialogue, he wanted to hear dialogue, but he didn't want to hear anything else. So I had to give him his personal mix. I had to give George the mix that, again, he didn't particularly want to hear all the engine noises. He wanted to hear the actors and PJ. And then sometimes he wanted to, or oftentimes it developed that he wanted to talk to John Seal, the DP, and then his two operators. So then they had IFBs of mine as well. So John didn't necessarily want to hear the dialogue because he was very close to the action, but he just wanted to hear George Miller talking to him. or when he requested it, he said, oh yeah, on this one I can't quite hear it. Well, really, you couldn't hear it anyway once the vehicles were going. In reality, you know, the only way you could hear it was through the IFBs. And so I gave them that different submixers so they could communicate. The reason for that was that we had everybody had walkies. The stunties had their own walkies, etc. But once we got to a certain area, we went past the last of the repeater towers for the walkies, and they weren't very reliable. And oftentimes they were, if they were inside a vehicle, it was difficult to speak on a walkie because you're in a Faraday cage almost. So we had these mag mounts on top of all the vehicles. We looked like little police cars because we had all these tiny little whip aerials with magnetic bottoms, and just stick it onto the top of the vehicle. And that's how I had to operate as well. All my IFB transmitters and the radio receivers, they were all outside the vehicle, either mounted on a scaffold pipe or on board racks, you know, or straight onto the vehicle with a mag mount. So so I was out of the action as far as distance goes, so I was able to hear what was going on. So if I wanted to hear the dialogue when we were travelling, I would be able to monitor down and mix down for myself what I was hearing. So I didn't really want to hear the vehicle so much. I was just concentrating on the dialogue. And also the instructions from the first AD and the DP. And I also had two walkies, my walkie for my guys and a walkie for the production, again routed into a mixer. So I had like an old Mackie 16-channel desk with 6 auxiliaries, and I was just feeding little mixers all over the place. And then for myself, I could do my own monitor mix and listen via cans. In between setups, I had a couple of small Sony speakers set up into the van as well, so I could. But then I hard left and hard right panned, say if I wanted to hear the walkie conversation on one side and the dialogue or the director on the other or something like that, so I could have a breather and take my cans off. You know? Yeah. But it wasn't really able to monitor anything really, apart from, we're about to go, so I put my cans back on, you know, that kind of thing. So, because there's a lot of chatter and getting ready and that kind of stuff in between takes, as you would know. You know? Of course, so, yeah. No, it's just fascinating how you how you got around everything, which is amazing. And in terms of, just because the vehicles are so loud, what mics were you using for them? Because often you can, because it must have been it's radios, right? So it's just interesting to know your settings. Yeah. So I had low sensitivity DPAs, a lot of them, and then we got some extra low sensitivity DPAs brought in. I think we had 4 of them for when we did some of the louder vehicles. I also tried with a couple of old dynamic mics as well and rigged them up, but because they were so there was so much bumping and grinding going on with the vehicles, mounts didn't really work that well. The lighter the microphone, like the little DPAs, they're almost suspended in themselves, and we had them almost free form, you know. Right. And one of the guys had because we had an RF guy from Australia come to help us out, because there was so much RF work that we had to work with. I mean, we had 46 channels or something for us, you know, and then also being able to do maintenance on equipment was fantastic. So he came up with the idea. So he went to a shop like an old to buy a couple of old hard drives, pulled them apart and got the magnets out of them. And he said, why don't we tape the microphone onto a magnet, and then just, it's really quick to stick it on. So for suspension, we put a lot of blue tack. Then we gaffer taped the blue tack just to make sure we're over the top of, so it was, okay, so say it's a little round thing like that, then we put some blue tack on top of it, stick the cable of the DPA on top, and then just put a little bit of gaffer tape over it so it's not going to fall off, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And or even cloth tape, I think we might have as well. And then that was really quick, because you could place that in anywhere in the vehicles, because they're all metal, and you know, upside down, everything. They were really strong magnets, and so you didn't have to do a lot of cable tying and all that kind of stuff. Wow. The only cable tying we did was, you know, suspended the transmitter somewhere safe.
Yeah.
And fortunately, there were a couple in the Hero vehicle. The Colin Gibson, the production designer, made a couple little pouches for us. You know, like it was for the design of the thing, but it just happened to be there, and little leather pouches, and we just dropped the transmitter there, and it was, you could see through, you know, transmission wires, and just clip on the mic on with the magnet, and it just worked a treat. And so the mic itself was just, you know, we might have had a little bit of like that far away from the thing, just drooping down, so the mic is kind of, it's not rigid against anything. Yeah, so that helped a lot. And of course, we had Mark Washatak, who's the main boom, traveling with a vehicle with a cast a lot of the time when they had they had platform on the side, and so he had like a 416 or something like that. Usually 416, because they're pretty rugged mics, and there's a lot of dust, and I didn't want my Sheps out there, you know. They wouldn't have lasted that long, unfortunately, or fortunately that they didn't go out there. And so he was able to, at the same time, or an 816, to be able to just stick, you know, hand hold and just point it down that way and shield himself from the wind when they were traveling and get some good effects on the run.
Nice.
And also when we're out and doing drive-bys and things like that, we've got a lot of good stuff. But most of the time they were set mics rigged on vehicles traveling. Even on the motorbikes, we're able to hook them up on that. They also had lots of leather.
Yeah, they're all pretty elaborate.
Yeah, so it was easy to hide stuff on those. Oh yeah, and also is I don't know if I should be saying it. Well, anyway, Tom Hardy had a really great idea. He wanted to be distracted all the time. He wanted to, you know, be a little crazy, and also when somebody was delivering dialogue to him, he wanted to hear something else in his ear. So I had a little phonak system that he was able to operate with him by himself. He had a little iPod Nano. Is that what they're called? Yeah, the little tiny,
the tiniest
iPods.
One.
Yeah, iPod Nano, and we had an output of that into a little Comtech transmitter, which he had in his pocket, and so he had a phonak in-ear piece in there, so he could play any music that he wanted. Like he had the Goons on sometimes, or he might have had some other comedy or whatever he fancied. He'd sort of come up with whatever, you know. And so it was like we'd have to, you know, that was the other boomy Brendan always had that on ready, made sure the battery was okay for that, and the Comtech, and give it to them just before the shot, and he'd be doing just about all the scenes with that. And
amazing.
So that's what he wanted. He wanted to be distracted all the time.
Yeah.
Other times, obviously he switched it off and said, no, I'll do this without it. And
yeah, because he has some scenes where he's more connected at the end, doesn't he? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, fantastic. Did you get a recording at the same time? That would be hilarious in rushes, just to be able to hear what Tom Hardy's listening to. Just like, meanwhile.
I think I had enough to do. Yeah. Meanwhile, the goods are right. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And in terms of like how many runs you would do, because obviously batteries being a main consideration in terms of you kind of just got to set and forget. How long were you kind of shooting for before you kind of, I don't know, got a change in vehicle, got a break, or did that ever become an issue?
No, because I'd like to be a lot greener than I was on that film, but we used a lot of lithiums.
Right.
Particularly on the transmitters, we had to, because we'd rely on them working for 4 hours, and then we'd have a run. I'd see, it's time we. Actually, I couldn't see unless it was direct, because I don't know if we talked about the system that we did. Because they were in a Faraday cage. I explained that in that article, I think, that I gave you. Because they were in a Faraday cage in the vehicle. We had Block 24 transmitters on them. And also in the cabin, I had Block 24, like the Cub, the Sanken Cub mic in one position. Another, I might have had a little Sheps with a knuckle sometimes, or another couple of DPAs just tacked on, in particular parts just for action or for spill, or if somebody didn't have a radio mic because one of the cast, didn't have a top
topless. On.
Yeah. And so he'd move, if he'd moved there, I'd have a mic in position just to get a guide, so I had one aerial receiver inside the cabin with a cable going to the Block 24 receivers that were inside the tanker, and they were in a ruggedized case. So I had 2 venue racks with 6 in each.
This is your pods, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So,
yeah.
So out of that came the 12 outputs of the Block 24 into 12 transmitters. The was it UM400s, and but they were, say, on Block 23 on different frequencies. So it was just like a relay. And then there was a multiplexing system that the SMA, instead of like the little whip aerials, we had little SMA leads that came out of there into this multiplexing box, which was like in a 1 rack unit. And then I had a was it a Meon UPS? So I think that was a 6 rack unit box, and at the back of the box was like a temperature control system, and inside the tanker for lighting and for special effects there was a 10K Jenny, so we were able to tap into that, and because the cooling system needed about 1K of power. So
I bet, yeah, it must have got hot.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, but at least it saved the gear. It was suspended. We've got the cases from the UK. They're really good. They're sort of like military style things, you know. And so therefore, I couldn't get the telemetry. I couldn't see what I mean, unless I was inside that box, I couldn't see the status of the batteries.
Right.
So we had to rely. We had to rely on the time factor. Once they got on, we'd say, you know, like in 3.5 hours, it's about time. But we had time to because the runs might have gone for half an hour.
Oh, right, okay.
Come back, change cameras, and, you know, if that's the case, you know, the casts come off and they might have gone into another vehicle, which was a duplicate. They had 4 duplicates of the vehicle, of the master vehicle,
okay,
of the war rig.
Yeah.
And so we had 2 of those, what we call the Sputniks, and we had to juggle them between 4 vehicles and make sure that so the scheduling was really important. We knew ahead of time, you know, like at the second half of the day, we're going to use the, you know, the B trailer and the A rig or something like that. So we were able to put the stuff in the trailer. So yeah, so we had time. And then when they were closer to me and I could get proper reception, I still had a Block 24, you know, 2 Block 24 receivers in my van as well, so I could get direct, and then I could see how the battery status was going.
And were you generally just using, because you're using electrosonics, so were you using like the dual battery ones, or generally the single was the size?
The single was for the girls. Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
We had the dual ones for Max and most other cast, but when the female cast were on, they had very skimpy outfits. So
yeah.
And it was really great. Oh, what's her name? The costume lady was really fantastic, and she actually sewed some little very thin bags for the transmitters in the back of their bras, and then actually sewed the mics on the front of their outfits.
Oh, amazing.
Because we couldn't tape anything.
Yeah,
it was very, very difficult outfits to play with, but yeah, so it was what it was.
Yeah, and it didn't look too windy. I mean, wind was obviously a factor when you were moving, but generally, otherwise, apart from the heat, were there any other considerations in terms of the weather? Yeah,
it was. We did get wind quite a bit, and sometimes you couldn't read it. But we did have a couple of sandstorms.
Oh, right.
Okay. Came through. But it might have been like on one day, on a Monday, we might have been at a canyon and it was really hot and hardly any wind. But the next day we're in the salt flats, which were south of where we were staying, about 100 kilometres south. And that was right off the Atlantic, and there's a cold current that comes up from Antarctica, and it's always cold, freezing, yeah, and windy.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it was like you had the total extremes within a week of being there, you know. So some of the locations were about 100 kilometres north and then 50 or 100 k's inland, and that was quite hot. And then whenever we were on the coast, from this particular location, where they got bogged and you know, they sort of strapped onto the tree and all that kind of stuff, and yeah, that was pretty cold most of the time. We were all in you know, 3 or 4 layers and beanies and gloves and.
Amazing.
And the poor cast, you know, they had that skimpy outfits and they, you know, big overcoats and and action, you know, right out.
Yeah, it's just something you never think of. Again, it's just that like common thing of like, oh, you're shooting in Africa. Yeah, that must always be that must be boiling all the time.
Yeah.
Amazing. So with sewing it into the costume, just because it might be windy occasionally, when you're sewing it in, are you sewing in with kind of wind protection or?
Yeah. Are you familiar with the DPA mics?
Yeah.
So we had
I run
little fluffies. Yeah.
Right.
We had the fluffies in there, and also tried to get it within the material, so to have another layer.
Yeah, for another screen.
Help,
right.
You know. Yeah. But most of the time, I mean, we had the. Sorry, I think there's somebody. Is that you tapping or?
Maybe there's someone at my door.
Just hang by. Yeah, maybe it is. I'll go and check.
Yeah, no problem.
Do you mind?
Yeah, no, we'll take a pause there.
Was that you knocking, Alana? I thought I heard something. Must have been here. We're having a break.
Oh, hello. Sorry about that. Yeah, it was my landlord trying to get some documentation or something. I don't know.
Okay.
It's very confusing.
I haven't got your picture at the moment.
Oh, I should hopefully be. I don't know. I should be.
Shall I click on Matt, maybe?
Maybe that'll help. I did just turn it back on. Maybe it's a bit slow just to.
There we go.
On and off again. Yeah. Oh.
Yep.
Yeah, on and off again. That's always a good key. Fantastic. Right. Sorry. It's always just throws me when someone else asks me loads of questions. I'm just like, what?
Yeah. What? Yeah.
Exactly. Glass of water, very important. We have been going for a while. Thank you very much for your time so far. I just have a few more things if you still have time.
No worries. Yeah. Tell me if this is scratching, by the way. So.
It is occasionally.
Oh,
it's not. Yeah. It's an awkward placement for it.
Yeah.
But it just so are you still doing more teaching at the moment? In terms of
there's
different
I've done a little bit. There's a new branch of the New York Film Academy that started in Sydney. They've got a Sydney branch and one in the Gold Coast with the Warner Studios, the Gold Coast, which is in Queensland, which is another state in Australia. And they're very nice there. They're not really geared for sound as such. They're mainly for writers, directors, and actors. But they bring me in, and I actually push to bring my equipment in, not the fully fledged stuff all the time, but just to give them a
more
overall,
up to date, more up to date
look.
I
mean, they've got some pretty old stuff, but or pretty sort of entry level equipment.
Yeah.
But that's fine if you're going to do run and gun kind of stuff. You have to learn how to use that stuff. But I might just bring my bag set up and a little monitor. But the thing that I do bring is the IFBs, so they can hear what they're doing, and I just sit them down, and everybody takes a turn on being the recordist. Everybody takes a turn on being the boom operator, and they do a little production in a room, a 3-page thing, and they have fun. They get to. I might give them a few pointers here and there and help them out. And then they get to cut it later. And there's a sound editor that goes with them and, points out a few things.
Fantastic. I ask as well, just because I have done some kind of freelance teaching as well. So it's just interesting to hear your process.
Yeah. That's the basic one, but then there's like film schools that have, sound departments, and they're learning to be sound recordists or boom operators or mixers or whatever. Unfortunately, our flagship school at the moment hasn't got a location sound course, which is. It's a shame. They haven't had it for about 2 or 3 years now, or a couple of years at least. But what I've been doing is that there's other courses that they might have, like a 6-week course. They had a 1-year course there for a while.
Right. Okay.
But
so more
I've
short
had a couple
courses.
of guys. Yeah. But and then they have like this weekend course on how to become a sound recordist.
Oh, wow.
And I think it's a bit bizarre. I don't know how they do that. But it's interesting because I had a guy who's been doing post-sound and video work for 16 years, and he did a 1 weekend course, and somebody recommended that he ring me and come out with me. But there's one guy, and he came out with me a few days ago, and we had an interesting job. But the one I'm really pleased about is another guy called Ben, and he did a 2-year college course on sound. He comes from an electrician. He's a qualified electrician, and he was working in the building trade and didn't want to do that anymore. And then he did the college thing, and then he approached me and he said, "Look, I've been doing short films, I've been doing the odd small commercial or the very small productions as a recordist boom operator, doing both." And I said, "But I really want to learn how to be a boom operator." And he's basically been my shadow. And he comes out on shoots with me, and I get him, if it's like a commercial that doesn't require a boom, or I might boom it myself if it's a very simple thing, I'll get him to do it. And so slowly I've been getting him more paid jobs, but it's opened him up to the world of bigger productions, so he could see the protocol, he could see how we relate to each other, all the different departments, and in a more professional level. And it's been a great education. He loves it, absolutely loves it. And at the moment he's working on a Mel Gibson film in Australia, which I was going to be doing, but unfortunately I fell ill, and I was in pre-production, and it was about 2 weeks before starting. I'd been to all the surveys. I'd I'd sorted everything out. And unfortunately, I came down with something that I had to get sorted, and now I'm okay.
Okay,
But,
that's good.
So I had my crew and everything, and I'd also organised for him to come as an attachment. And one of the other film schools approached me to bring somebody else on as well for a week, but he wanted to do the whole film. And we've been able to get him on parts of the film to hopefully get paid on some stuff, but he's finding it like he's going to university. He's absolutely loving it. He can, he's saved some money to actually be able to do that. So
amazing.
He's really loving it. And now he can get anything out of my van. And, I say, can you set up the IFBs or put the radio mics on, or, so he's getting a lot more comfortable. He just has to have a bit more experience in the booming side of things. And he's got really two good teachers at the moment on that film, who's Sue Kerr, who is quite an experienced boom operator, has been through the film school in the 80s, and is a very good teacher. She can verbalize things really well, very succinctly, and on how to approach things, and also the protocols of how to do things, but also the technical ways of approaching boom operating. So I think he's getting a lot out of it. And plus he's on a big film, and he's getting the experience, which is great.
Getting the proper taste for it. It's fantastic. Yeah. There's always this thing about whether it's kind of I mean, firstly, the whole concept of kind of teaching sound in a kind of film school university environment. But I always found that it was kind of like although it's not the ideal testing ground, it's brilliant for when you're getting on and doing some actual other films with those people. That's where you get the kind of key experiences, not necessarily the sitting down and this is your mixer, and that is probably a weekend course. But then all the experience in terms of the know-how definitely comes from all the different productions
and how you relate to people. But what I think is really good about film schools, if they're done well, is to become filmmakers rather than just a technician in one department. Because then you have the experience of being able to play with the camera department for a while and do some editing, or do some sound editing, or write your own script, or direct your little thing. It just gives you an overall feel. Plus you've got all that wealth of knowledge there that you can tap into the best films to look at for what particular genre, and I think that's a great opportunity. If anybody ever gets it, I wish I did it, but I feel that I had my little bit when I was teaching there in the mid-80s, and I got a good vibe out of it that way. But at the same time, once you've finished with that, then get on a feature film set, and then you find out how the cogs work, and how you can sort of slip into that area yourself and be part of it, and do your as best a job as you can, but also aiding everybody else. And I still love doing it.
Yeah, I think it's a very very social environment in a way, because it's completely collaborative from every level, which is great. So even though you're doing technically the same, or not even technically, sometimes the same thing, of you have the same mission, you've got the same kind of tools, it's always kind of a different way of kind of getting there, which keeps it kind of fresh, and your skills kind of up to date, I guess. Which is great. No, that's what I love about it as well. It's really cool. So I guess that I should probably wrap up now, because we've been going for like an hour and a half, which is fantastic.
Really?
Yeah, exactly. The time does fly. It truly does. but I don't want to keep you too long into the
No worries.
the early hours over there. Because what are you? You're 11 hours behind.
No, you are 10 hours behind.
10 hours behind.
Because
yes.
we're
it's very confusing because you're
it's oh goodness me, it's 20:54 at Tuesday evening.
Yeah, so it's Tuesday morning here at 10:54 here.
Yeah.
No, fantastic.
There you go.
But I will definitely arrange another sound chat probably. I'm trying to catch up and touch base with people kind of periodically. I actually did a chat with Wayne Pashley as well, funnily enough. So I had a good
well done. Yeah,
so I had a good hour chat with him. But thank you so much for your time so far, and thanks for everyone who's been watching and kind of chiming in and stuff. They're all finding it kind of really useful, which is always really good to know. But I always enjoy them anyway. But I'm just hoping that.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I saw that one. What was the last one that you did?
Did remember. Daniel McCoy yesterday, or I did?
Oh no, it was a couple of weeks ago, I think. Oh yeah, how often do you do it?
Well, now I'm starting to do them quite a lot. Last year I did I think I did like 20 in a month, which was a bit insane. But now I've started up again. But I got in contact with like 500 people, so everyone's kind of dripped through. So I've suddenly found myself really busy. So I actually have three today. So I have you.
Today.
Yeah. So so there's this one, and then at 6 o'clock my time, then I have one, and then at 7 I have one as well. But I'll keep those shorter, just to like an hour. But
well, good luck with it.
Yeah, no,
and good to meet you.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll kind of officially end the video, but then I'll say goodbye to you kind of off air, as it were.
Oh, all right, sure.
So I don't know. A good way to kind of leave everything is just for the people kind of starting out, just kind of a bit more kind of career advice. I don't know if you have any kind of off the top of your head in terms of people looking to get in and try and assist, or even just try and pursue their own projects. If you had any kind of nugget of advice to give
for them, if they've had an education in sound to start with already, or
that kind of starting off realm of whether they've done a course on it, or whether they're kind of they've done their first couple of shorts and then they're trying to just kind of break into the industry more and just kind of found their calling. Anything on kind of collaboration?
The two things. One is if there's a film school that's nearby that has got a sound department, would be really good to, even if it's like a 6-month course, they'd get a lot out of it. And out of that, you also get a lot of contacts. And the lecturers there might know somebody that's starting a film or whatever. And the other way is to contact sound recordists, if that's what they want to do. If it's in post-production, or if it's on location, they might want to, just feel it out. And I get asked quite often for people to come and meet me and have a chat, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with them and kind of get the feel of what they might want to be doing. They just don't know. Sometimes I met this girl through somebody the other day that she's an amazing graphic artist, but she wants to be a filmmaker, basically wants to be a filmmaker. And somebody knew that I was in the film industry doing sound, and they thought that she did sound, but she didn't. But we still chatted for a couple of hours, and I gave her some, avenues for her to pursue that she didn't think of beforehand. So, personally, I love having people come as attachments to observe, and I wouldn't push them too hard, just to see what's going on. And then if they're really serious about wanting to pursue, like the chap I was talking to you about before, then give them more and more tasks to do. But I think the first thing, if they come on a big shoot, it's overwhelming. There's so many departments are doing so many things at the same time. I think the first week or you just leave them to just observe, maybe give them some cans and listening to what I'm doing if that's what their area is. But the first thing is to observe how people are reacting and what they're doing, and then after that, then they can start seeing what our requirements are for everyday kind of jobs, like rolling up cables, or setting up a trolley with equipment, or putting up a PA stack or something, all sorts of different things, or going back to the truck or the van to get a particular item that I might spend half an hour looking for, but once they find it, they know it is. But like most of the things, I know where they are and I'll point them to the right direction. And I had a really great assistant on that film down in Tasmania last year. He's French, Stéphane Goussat, his name is. And he came to Australia for a year working visa, and he's a sound recordist. He records features as well in France. He's from Paris. Lovely guy and great boom operator. And before I knew it, he had all my cases labeled. You open up the radio mic case and you've got all the frequencies all set up in bright, fluoro tape and all that. Wow. And for him, he wanted to do it for himself. So when he gets to the van, he sees, so he left a great legacy. You come to my van and all the cases are labeled exactly what's in them, So it won't be too hard, but there's a lot of stuff in there, Yeah, so that's my advice. If you can, just get on a list of people that are working in films and seeing if it's possible to get an attachment. I know in Australia, because of insurance purposes, some productions will expect you to have your own insurance for whatever time you're there, but others are happy to provide it. But even commercials, on a TV commercial, it's still a good experience to get on there because it's a mini film, so you could see what's going on.
A nice snapshot. Fantastic. Well, I shall give you a round of applause.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
It's so yeah, always want to use all these things, but
yeah, why not?
But so I'll sign off and say thank you very much to everyone who's been watching Sound Chats, and when we go offline, I'll say goodbye to you personally as well, but I'll leave you with the final goodbye.